you're behind the wheel of your probably not very posh car, if you're anything like me, and you're being tailgated by a really annoying person, and they just won't get off your back, and you're going at a sensible speed. What can you do? Is that a moment when you experience road rage? Or you're driving down your local high street and there's nowhere to get out of the way of oncoming traffic. Everyone starts beeping at you. They seem to think that you're in the wrong. They're giving you bad vibes. You've been sitting there waiting for maybe 10 minutes and there's no way of getting out of this situation. You begin to see a black fury or a red mist. That's why I'm wearing red tonight, to represent rage. I wonder if any of you have actually experienced road rage recently. I actually have, and that's why I decided to do this particular topic tonight. Sorry, just adjusting my camera a little bit. Um, because some of you who came last week will remember that I was talking about decluttering and books that would help you to declutter your brain, which reminds me, I will put up a screen, a post with all the books that I talked about last week on Instagram and Facebook. So I was talking about decluttering, and that actually led me to go and completely declutter my studio where I paint. And I've barely been able to get into my studio for the last 6 months because it's been so incredibly messy and absolutely full of clutter. So, inspired by my own decluttering literature that I was telling you all about last week, I decided to go and declutter the studio, which meant that I then had to actually get to the dump. So I drove to the dump and got to the dump, but our local dump has now told us that you can't go in, you can't take your car full of junk into said recycling and distribution centre of Burgess Hill because you have to show your ID, and I'd forgotten to bring my handbag. And I'd just driven all the way with this car absolutely chock-a-block with rubbish that I was so excited to get rid of. And I got to the dump all excited and happy, and they wouldn't let me in. At that moment, I saw red and experienced road rage, clutching onto my wheel of my car. I sped off back home to get my bloomin' driving license in a rage, and I really was feeling quite infuriated, which made me think about ways of getting over such fury. And I just got to grab my notes so that I can tell you all about cures for road rage. Because when I was thinking about this, oh, hang on, where's my extra notes? I don't know if I've got those. Hold your horses. I could be having a minor notes crisis. Let's not panic. Oh, here we go. Here it is. This actually led me to think about a cure that I have used myself and which me and Susan wrote about as a novel cure in the good old days when we had a column in the independent newspaper. We used to write a weekly cure, which was a novel cure, only 300 words, and it was a really great and fun little column. And one of our cures was a cure for when you get a parking ticket. And when you get a parking ticket, I think that's a very similar emotion to what happens when you experience road rage, because you come back to your car, you think you've got away with parking, possibly in the wrong place, and suddenly you see this horrible ticket and you've maybe only 1 minute after the time that you're meant to be. The traffic warden's disappeared, and you might see red and be in a fury, which has actually happened to me, particularly when I had very small children, three of them that I was carrying around, parked in a space that I wasn't meant to park in near a local shop, came back, there was a traffic warden, experienced extreme fury. So I'm going to read you the cure that we used in our independent column for when you get a parking ticket, which I think is also a brilliant cure for road rage. And in fact, when I was having this moment a few days ago, coming out of the dump that I wasn't allowed into, I thought of this book as a way of curing myself of the road rage, and it worked. So that is bibliotherapy in action. So the cure is Capital by John Lanchester. That moment of outrage when you return to your car to find a ticket on your windscreen is almost unparalleled in modern urban life. Unless you've left your car on a double yellow, it's obviously not your fault. And even if it was, what else are you supposed to do when you nip into the dry cleaners? Many of us experience a flood of hate or murderous thoughts towards the traffic warden responsible. And we refer you to our columns of recent weeks for help with these ailments. But for a more targeted cure, read Capital, John Lanchester's self-described big fat London novel. Set in and around Pepys Road in SE14, a part of town in which house values have rocketed in recent years, Capital examines the effects of wealth on Lanchester's cast of characters. A banker replete with country house, shopaholic wife and nanny, a Polish builder, an old lady with a brain tumour, the family who run the corner shop, and Quentina, a political refugee from Zimbabwe with an MA in post-conflict resolution, who now works as a traffic warden. When Quentina witnesses the furious reaction engendered in her spoilt neighbours by her parking tickets, she responds with an even greater fury of her own. Get down on your knees, she yearns to shout. Be grateful. 1 billion people living on $1 a day, as many who can't find clean drinking water. You live in a country where there is a promise to feed, clothe, shelter, and doctor you, where the state won't come and beat or imprison you or conscript you, where the government does not lie to you about AIDS, where the only bad thing is the climate, and you find it in yourself to complain about parking, and so on. For her internal rant goes on for a page. We suggest you download the audio version and play it whenever you see that telltale yellow square on your windscreen, a symbol of prosperity put there to remind you you're one of the lucky ones. Now, we wrote that a few years ago. It's the kind of thing we might write slightly differently now because one has so little trust of our current government. However, the basic principle is still the same, which is that if you are experiencing road rage for whatever reason, which could be because you've just been given a parking ticket, or because you've just been turned away from your local dump because you can't show them your ID and therefore you can't drop off the enormous amount of decluttering that you've so brilliantly created because you watched my video last week all about decluttering, which did have a profound effect on me to the extent that I had a car chock-a-block with junk that I needed to get rid of at the dump. So that might be the reason that you're experiencing road rage. Or you might be experiencing it because you can't get through your local high street because there's so many cars coming in different directions. Whatever it is, that moment of road rage, think to yourself about Quentina in the book by John Lanchester called Capital, who is a refugee from Zimbabwe, whose government had been lying to them about AIDS for years on end, and who has lived in peril of her life on a daily basis in Zimbabwe and didn't have enough money to feed herself, and so on. She is saying that we live in a prosperous culture, and if we're experiencing road rage, it's because we're the lucky ones, basically. That's what you have to think to yourself. We are the lucky ones. If you're lucky enough to have a car, be in a hurry to get somewhere, be rushing down a high street, like me, perhaps going to the dump in order to get rid of your excess clutter. That's because we are the lucky ones. And therefore, you should listen to Quentina, get down on your knees and thank God that you're not living in a country where you can't trust your government. Although, hang on, I can't really say that anymore, can I? However, you know what I mean. We are still comparatively lucky in many, many ways. So that's one really good cure for road rage. And while I'm here thinking about road rage, there's always the Moomins as well. If ever you're having moments of rage for whatever reason, have a Moomin to hand and read the books, read the Moomin books if you haven't read them already, because they will always calm you down. Everything's better in the world of Moomin Land. Jane, great to see you here this evening. Lauren, lovely to see you too. And Mama Culture, great to have you joining me this evening. On Facebook at the moment, I'm not seeing comments, which is really frustrating. I only see them after the event. So I do apologise if anyone ever comments on Facebook because I tend to always see them at the end of the session. If you can, send me comments on Instagram because that will be seen at the time. Anyway, more on road rage and cures for road rage. Another reason that I was thinking about this very topic tonight, high and strong emotions, is because in my art class, because I also teach art in my local village, we've been looking at ways of exploring colour, and I decided to ask the art class to paint representations of colour, sorry, representations of emotion in colour. And I'll just show you, this is my example. So I've got love, happiness, joy, wonder, hope, contentment, boredom is there somewhere. That's that one. Despair, irritability, loss, envy, and loneliness. So these are all colours of emotions. I then asked the art class to paint a pumpkin in the colour of an emotion that they wanted to express. Emotional pumpkins was the theme of, is the theme of the week this week. I've still got some of my class doing this exercise on Friday. Can't wait. Hi in Abu Dhabi, Mama Culture. Great to see you. That's so exciting that you've come all the way from Abu Dhabi to join me this evening. I wonder if you get road rage in Abu Dhabi. I would imagine you probably do. Tell me about it if so. And if you do, how do you cure yourself? Do you cure yourself with a good read? Or do you take deep breaths and meditate? So, getting back to, I will be talking more about books, but I just wanted to share with you this idea of exploring emotion in colour, because that's a really fun thing to do as well. And anyone that wants to see more about my art classes, go on to elabertu.art on Instagram and Facebook, and you'll see, or it might be elabertu.paintings, you'll see examples of what my lovely art class have been doing. So I painted, as an example, emotional pumpkins, and this is a board pumpkin using the colours from my chart. This one is a contented pumpkin, and then in the background I've got happiness as my overall background. And if you go onto Instagram later, then I'll be putting up some of the other emotional pumpkins that my class painted because they were really great. And actually I really wanted to do a furious pumpkin, and if you keep checking my Instagram, hopefully you'll find a furious pumpkin there eventually. I wonder how you would paint it. What colours would you paint rage or fury? Would it be red? Would it be black? Would it be yellow and exploding? Also an interesting thought. So all of these thoughts were leading me to the idea of looking at road rage because it's such a powerful emotion. and I wanted to think about how one might cure it through books. So, a book that inevitably comes to mind when you're thinking about this topic is Crash by J.G. Ballard, which is a particularly disturbing and unsettling, but really brilliant novel, which caused quite a big stir when it was published in 1973. And there was later on an equally disturbing film made based on the novel. So, J.G. Ballard, born 1930, died 2009. Lots of you will be familiar with his writing. He was a novelist, short story writer, satirist, and essayist, known for his provocative works of fiction, including The Drowned World. There's a book called Cocaine Nights. He also wrote Miracles of Life, The Kindness of Women, and many other. The Crystal World is another really brilliant, beautiful, and shocking book of his. Many of his books have been adapted into films, including Crash, which was adapted by David Cronenberg. And he also wrote a book called High Rise. So he writes in a very distinctive fashion and with very literary, beautiful writing. And as a result, his works are frequently called Ballardian. Ballardian is actually in the English dictionary because Ballardian scenarios are known as ones that are dystopian, disturbing, worrying, but possibly in some cases strangely attractive. The Collins English Dictionary describes Ballardian as resembling or suggestive of the conditions described in J.G. Ballard's novels and stories, especially dystopian modernity, bleak man-made landscapes, and the psychological effects of technological, social, or environmental developments. He does write very much about the environment. And without further ado, I'm going to read you the opening section of this book. He actually wrote a really brilliant and also rather disturbing introduction. So I'm going to read you a bit of that and then the very beginning of the book, because the introduction itself is really interesting and powerful and controversial. He says, in addition, I feel that the balance between fiction and reality has changed significantly in the past decades. He wrote this in 1973. Increasingly, their roles are reversed. We live in a world ruled by fictions of every kind. Mass merchandising, advertising, politics conducted as a branch of advertising, the preempting of any original response to experience by the television screen. We live inside an enormous novel. It is now less and less necessary for the writer to invent the fictional content of his novel. The fiction is already there. The writer's task is to invent the reality. In the past, we have always assumed that the external world around us has represented reality, however confusing or uncertain, and that the inner world of our minds, in dreams, hopes, ambitions, represented the realms of fantasy and the imagination. These roles, it seems to me, have been reversed. The most prudent and effective method of dealing with the world around us is to assume that it is complete fiction. Conversely, the one small node of reality left to us is inside our own heads. Freud's classic distinction between the latent and manifest content of the dream, between the apparent and the real, now needs to be applied to the external world of so-called reality. I realise I'm going a bit off topic here with the idea of road rage, but this is a really interesting book to explore thinking about the topic of road rage, because Ballard claims that his main character, who's called Vaughan, experiments with erotic atrocities among crash victims, each more sinister than the last. Ultimately, he craves a union of blood, semen, and engine coolant in a head-on collision with Elizabeth Taylor. It's all deeply worrying, frankly. And I will just read you a bit from the beginning of the book, because it does give you a very strong flavour of what the whole book is like. Um, why is it a cure for road rage? Well, it would probably completely put you off driving ever again because it's so terrifying, grim, and dystopian. So that's one way. It's also a totally strange world that he takes you to that is not quite reality as we know it. And there is something mesmerizingly beautiful about it, but it also would make you drive in a much more safe and sensible way, perhaps, than you ever have before, because so many terrible things happen. I will be talking about some more positive and optimistic books after this, but I just want to read you a bit of this because it is all quite powerful. Chapter 1. Vaughan died yesterday in his last car crash. During our friendship, he had rehearsed his death in so many crashes, but this was his only true accident. Driven on a collision course towards the limousines of the film actress, his car jumped the rails of the London airport flyover and plunged through the roof of a bus filled with airline passengers. The crushed bodies of packaged tourists, like a hemorrhage of the sun, still lay across the vinyl seats when I pushed my way through the police engineers an hour later. Holding the arm of her chauffeur, the film actress Elizabeth Taylor, with whom Vaughan had dreamed of dying for so many months, stood alone under the revolving ambulance lights. As I knelt over Vaughan's body, she placed a gloved hand to her throat. Could she see in Vaughan's posture the formula of the death which he had devised for her? During the last weeks of his life, Vaughan thought of nothing else but her death, a coronation of wounds he had staged with the devotion of an Earl Marshal. The walls of his apartment near the film studios at Shepperton were covered with the photographs he had taken through his zoom lens each morning as she left her hotel in London, from the pedestrian bridges above the westbound motorways, and from the roof of the multi-storey car park at the studios. The magnified details of her knees and hands, of the inner surface of her thighs, and the left apex of her mouth, I uneasily prepared for Vaughan on the copying machine in my office, handing him the packages of prints as if they were the instalments of a death warrant. At his apartment, I watched him matching the details of her body with the photographs of grotesque wounds in a textbook of plastic surgery. In his vision of a car crash with the actress, Vaughan was obsessed by many wounds and impacts, by the dying chromium and collapsing bulkheads of their two cars, meeting head-on in complex collisions endlessly repeated in slow-motion films, by the identical wounds inflicted on their bodies, by the image of windshield glass frosting around her face as she broke its tinted surface like a death-born Aphrodite, by the compound fractures of their thighs impacted against their handbrake mountings, and above all by the wounds to their genitalia, her uterus pierced by the heraldic beak of the manufacturer's medallion, and so on. It's actually almost too much to actually read aloud. It's so grim. But there is something mesmerizing about it. His semen emptying across the luminescent dials that registered forever the last temperature and fuel levels of the engine. It was only at these times, as he described this last crash to me, that Vaughan was calm. And so it goes on. So that's Crash by J.G. Ballard, which is a very peculiar, worrying, shocking, and mesmerising book, which I would say is strangely a great cure for road rage, largely because it will probably make you never want to drive again. And if you are a driver, it will probably make you be incredibly careful and just a little bit paranoid, hopefully in a good way. I would also love to suggest that a great cure for road rage is the brilliant and marvellous Carl Hyarson. I never know if I'm pronouncing his name right. Sorry if not. Might be Hyarson, who is a writer from Florida who has written a series of excellent, very funny, darkly humorous books. He was born in 1953, American journalist and novelist. began his career as a newspaper reporter, but by the 1970s was beginning to write novels in his spare time and became a full-time novelist in the 80s. He's written many adult novels and several young adult novels as well. He often has a strong environmental theme, and one of his brilliant aspects as a writer is that he very much takes the mickey out of people in Florida who are building enormous businesses, often without paying any attention to the wildlife that they're destroying with their huge hotels and roads. And he very much takes these people to task. But the reason that I'm suggesting him as a cure for road rage is because all of his books are, in a way, about the madness of life as we know it, which is enough to make you feel like you're in a constant traffic jam. When you read his books, you feel like all aspects of modern life are enough to send you into a road rage. But he tackles your road rage with fabulous humour and really makes you laugh. And I would completely recommend him as a brilliant antidote to road rage. So his most famous books are Tourist Season, Striptease and Bad Monkey. Several of his books have actually been made into films as well. And he's also collaborated with other writers and script writers on his books and films. But this one, Lucky You, is one of my favourites, and I'll just read you a little synopsis about it. Jolene Lux learns that she's won the lottery and is happy that she can now afford to buy Simmons Wood, a small parcel of land not far from her home, where she likes to wander among the wild animals. However, Jolene's ticket is stolen by a couple of bumbling racists who decide that winning half of a $28 million lottery is not good enough. Tom Crome is a reporter who's been trying to divorce his wife for 4 years. Unfortunately, Cromer's wife is determined to not become the first woman in her family to be divorced, and she keeps hiding from the process server. At the same time, Crome has an affair with the religious wife of the local judge. When his lover decides that she must confess her sins, Crome's house is suddenly attacked and all the windows are broken. And so it goes on. I won't read you the whole synopsis, but I am going to read you the beginning of the book because it will give you a sense of the great dark humour within all of Carl Hyarsen's novels, and it will hopefully make you realise that he is a fantastic companion to take with you on any car journey, whether you take an actual book or put him on audio, because he's always great on audio too. On the afternoon of November the 25th, a woman named Jolene Lux drove to the Grab and Go mini mart in Grange, Florida, and purchased spearmint certs, unwaxed dental floss, and one ticket for the state lotto. Jolene Lux played the same numbers she'd played every Saturday for 5 years: 17, 19, 22, 24, 27, 30. The significance of her lotto numbers was this: each represented an age at which she had jettisoned a burdensome man. At 17, it was Rick, the Pontiac mechanic. At 19, it was Rick's brother Robert. At 22, it was a stockbroker named Colavito, twice Jolene's age, who delivered on none of his promises. At 24, it was a policeman, another Robert, who got in trouble for fixing traffic tickets in exchange for sex. At 27, it was Neil the chiropractor, a well-meaning but unbearable codependent. And at 30, Jolene dumped Lawrence, a lawyer, her one and only husband. Lawrence had been notified of his disbarment exactly 1 week after he and Jolene were married, but she stuck with him for almost a year. Jolene was fond of Lawrence and wanted to believe his earnest denials regarding the multiple fraud convictions that precipitated his trouble with the Florida bar. While appealing his case, Lawrence took a job as a toll taker on the Beeline Expressway, a plucky career realignment that nearly won Jolene's heart. This one night he was caught making off. Sorry, then one night he was caught making off with a £30 sack of loose change, mostly quarters and dimes. Before he could post bail, Joe Lane packed up most of his belongings, including his expensive Hermes neckties, and gave them to the Salvation Army. Then she filed for divorce. 5 years later, she was still single and unattached when, to her vast amusement, she won the Florida Lotto. She happened to be sitting with a plate of turkey leftovers in front of the television at 11 p.m. when the winning numbers were announced. Jolene Lux didn't faint, shriek, or dance wildly around the house. She smiled, though, thinking of the 6 discarded men from her past life, thinking how, in spite of themselves, they'd finally amounted to something. $28 million, to be precise. So that is the very beginning of Lucky You by Carl Hyarson, which is a fantastic romp of a novel as we discover what happens to Jolene Luck. Will she manage to keep on to her lottery winnings, or will she not? Will she ever manage to buy that piece of land that she's always fantasized about owning? Knowing Carl Hyarson, and without giving too much away, I would say the good guys are likely to win, and the anyone on the side of nature is likely to come up well. So Carl Hyarson, they feel good novels, even though there's quite a lot of violence, death, and darkness within them. They do always end up being positive, and generally the good people get the good things and the bad people get their just desserts, without wanting to spoil the story for you. But they're really brilliant, romping novels, and even Moomin Troll would agree. So, moving on to other potential road rage curing books. The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test by Tom Wolfe. This is a book which Jarvis Cocker described as a life changer, a rabble rouser, a mind blower, a gathering of the tribes, a call to arms, a manifesto for a new society, a car repair manual, a fly on the paisley patterned wall account of a cultural revolution, a masterpiece. Have I left anything out? Now let me try to justify that hyperbole if I can. Ken Kesey was arguably the most important American novelist to emerge in the early 1960s. His first novel, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, came out in 1962 to rave notices. The stage was set for him to become the alpha male of US writers, but Kesey had other things on his mind, or rather, in his mind. In 1959, he'd been one of the first people in the country to take LSD as part of a series of experiments conducted by the US government. Passages in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest were informed by these experiences. He found ways to smuggle the drug back home to share with his friends in the literary bohemian enclave of Perry Lane, Palo Alto. Word got out, people started visiting, a movement began to emerge. Another book, Sometimes a Great Notion, came out in 1964. More ecstatic reviews. Now he could ascend to the throne and rule the whole leather-bound book club endorsed roost. Instead, Kesey spent all the money he had on a bus. And somewhere I've got a copy of this book, but I'm not sure where. Instead, we'll use a pumpkin to represent the bus. This pumpkin bus is generally on the cover of most Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test books. And the bus is always incredibly psychedelic and really attractive. And the bus was called Further by all the people that were on it. So I'll just read you a bit more from Jarvis Cocker, who loves this book. Enter Tom Wolfe. Wolfe had pioneered a fresh approach to writing for magazines. People were calling it new journalism. Some of his best articles had already been published in book form in a collection entitled The Candy-Coloured Tangerine Flake Streamline Baby. The title tells you that these pieces were not exactly conforming to prevailing journalistic norms. Stories about customs car fanatics, surfers, gamblers, disco dancers, the emerging subcultures of America, are not written at arm's length either. No, there were lists, italics, capitals, exclamation marks. Any device was up for grabs if it helped make the reader feel that they were seeing the story from the point of view of the protagonists involved, rather than from the detached, objective vantage point of some journalist. Wolfe found Kesey in jail in late 1966 and persuaded him to tell the whole story of how he'd ended up there, how the golden boy of American literature had become a convicted felon, and how the social revolution he had accidentally incited was now rapidly blazing its way across the USA. And that is what became the electric Kool-Aid acid test, which is a really fun and exhilarating, upbeat read. It doesn't have a great deal of plot, um, and it focuses around the pranksters, who are the group of people that are going on this trip on the bus. But it tells you all about the various trips that they have using LSD, but also how they start taking acid tests, which are huge parties with multimedia presentations where everyone takes LSD and transcends reality into a state of intersubjectivity. The acid tests become wildly popular, and Kesey is the de facto leader of the new movement. There's all a bit of a vibe of Kesey becoming something of a cult leader type of person in this book. However, soon Kesey is busted by the authorities for possession of marijuana, and facing jail time, he flees the country to Mexico. The pranksters join him there, but in this desert land, they simply cannot recreate the feeling of the acid tests that they held back in California. Kesey decides to sneak back into the US and plays a cops and robbers game with the authorities, appearing on TV and giving interviews on the paper until he's finally caught by the FBI. Essentially, that is the book, but it's a great rip-roaring read, and I think definitely one that would really cure your road rage, because it makes driving seem like a really fun, exciting, and exhilarating activity, particularly when you're in a big psychedelic bus covered in fluorescent colours. Wouldn't we all rather be in one of them? And although there are moments of intensity and some moments of road rage, it's altogether a really fun read, and it's a kind of book that you should just keep in your glove pocket of your car, and then if you are in a traffic jam, get it out and have a little flick through it. But as my husband was saying earlier, one of the reasons why you get road rage in a traffic jam is because you can't even read a book, because a traffic jam means that you're moving a little bit, a tiny bit every now and then, but you're not still enough for long enough to read a book, which is just so frustrating. I have actually read a book while being in a traffic jam and got quite a lot of hilarity from the other drivers. I was being very safe, but a few people began to possibly experience road rage seeing me reading my book. So I wouldn't recommend that. Don't go reading books while in charge of a car. Listen to an audiobook instead. That's the answer. Or, if you can, have a book in your head. Be like Ray Bradbury, as he advocates in Fahrenheit 451, memorize a book, or memorize a part of a book, or memorize a poem, so that then when you're stuck in a road rage situation in a traffic jam, you can go into that world of the book in your head and escape into it. And that's what I meant by the earlier book I was talking about, the John Lanchester Capital. If you remember Quintana in that book, she makes you think about all the good things that you have in life and why actually having road rage is a privilege, because you're lucky enough to be in a car in a traffic jam, and that means that there's other worse things not happening in your life. So that's one type of book. Another type of book to have in your head might be a book like The Moomins or Thomas Hardy, Far from the Madding Crowd, one of my favourite ever novels, is a great book to have in your head for any moments of stress and difficulty, because there's so many beautiful moments describing nature and making you think about the elements and taking you back to a time where there were no cars, which is all rather magical and beautiful and calming. There's a book by Ruth Rendell called Road Rage, which is, I think it's the seventh in her Chief Inspector Wexford series. Um, I'm not the biggest fan of Ruth Rendell novels, but I know that some people absolutely love them. And she has written a book called Road Rage. They're the kind of books that you can read super quickly and devour and just get lost in a rather wonderful, slightly cheesy English world. So, in this book, Road Rage by Ruth Rendell, it's all set outside a little town called Kings Markham in England, where the woods are lovely, dark, and deep. And much of these woods are about to vanish forever when the new highway is to be cut through it. So, Chief Inspector Wexford, who lots of people have got to know from her previous novels, privately despaired about the loss of his hiking grounds in these woods, and local residents and outsiders were organising a massive protest because of this road that's about to be cut through the woods. So, this is a book that's all about protesting the inevitable creation of this road. Some of them, some of these protesters may have been desperate enough to kidnap 5 hostages and threaten to kill them. One hostage was Wexford's wife, Dora. So that's where it gets interesting. We've got a hostage, and it's our chief inspector's wife. Now, combining high technology with his extraordinary detective skills, Wexford and his team race to find the whereabouts of the kidnappers, because someone has crossed from political belief to fanaticism. And as the first body is found, good intentions may become Wexford's personal path to hell. So we were also talking last week about other books that have protesters, such as Richard Powers' book Overstory, in which protesters go and live in the top of a redwood tree in order to protect the redwood tree from being cut down. So this is a book with similar preoccupations. I would say Overstory is an infinitely better book to read and a great one to have in your head for moments of road rage, because there's this incredibly beautiful passage in it where there are a couple who have gone to live in the top of the canopy of the redwood tree, and they lived there for 2 years. And it's one of the most beautiful passages I've read in recent years about living in nature. And that's a passage to have in your head when you feel road rage coming on, because the minute you start seeing red, getting frustrated, wanting to bite your steering wheel, you should mentally go into the world of Richard Powers and think about what he is trying to express with that beautiful passage set in the canopy. So Ruth Rendell's Road Rage is a great fun, enjoyable, light read. And I just want to read you a really nice review for it that I found on Amazon, which is by a lady called Rena Sherwood. And I'd like to thank Rena Sherwood for this great review. She said, this book was one of many being passed around the homeless community around Bath, England, years ago when I was one of the community. It centres on motorway protests. I met many in the UK who participated in these protests, including a prim old lady sipping tea and smiling, talking about her arrest. The descriptions or protests of protests and protesters seemed accurate. How good was it? The book helped to distract me from being homeless. So that's a great review. And Rena Sherwood, I'd love to know what you went on to read later. Um, if you're out there, send me a message because you could be a great reviewer and example of bibliotherapy in action. So, what was I going to mention? Oh, yes. So, those are all of the books that I have collated which mention road rage or which in some way relate to road rage. But I would also like to just mention a couple of films which I think are really excellent cures for road rage as well. So, Falling Down is a film which some of you might have seen, in which the hero, at the very beginning, the hero is called Foster, is stuck in a traffic jam. It's sweltering hot, and he is experiencing terrible road rage. It's a really fascinating and rather brilliant film, and his day just goes from bad to worse because he spends the whole day trying to get to his daughter because he really wants to see his daughter on her birthday. I won't tell you what happens. It's called Falling Down, and it's a film that begins with a scene of road rage, and it is a brilliantly made and excellent movie. One that works on a different level and in a much more upbeat way is the fantastic La La Land, which was made in 2016, which stars Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling. And people that have seen it will know that it starts with an absolutely fantastic traffic jam where they're on a highway. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but outside a big city in America. And the cars are absolutely at a standstill, chock a block, not moving at all. And people start getting out of the cars. They're all looking gorgeous, of course, because it is a musical film and they're wearing lovely dresses. And the men are looking really cool as well. Out they get, and they all start dancing, and they start doing this amazing dance down the street in between the cars, and they get on top of the cars, and they're all dancing in sync, and it's just this wonderful, giant, gorgeous dance explosion. And that is a really fantastic cure for road rages too. If ever you're feeling like you're stuck in a road rage situation and you feel the redness descending over your eyes and you clench your fists and you feel a terrible urge to go and shout at people in the street, think of that scene and start dancing inside your car, maybe getting out of the car and dancing on your roof if the cars are not moving. Don't do anything dangerous, obviously, but dance. Think about La La Land. Get into that vibe and you will feel completely differently. Your road rage will dissipate and disappear. Another way of escaping road rage is to forgive the people around you, to forgive the other drivers that are annoying you, to forgive the situation. Um, in my case, when I was experiencing road rage the other day, I needed to forgive the authorities in charge of the dump who wouldn't let me into the dump to get rid of all my possessions that I was so brilliantly decluttering, inspired by my own decluttering uh, discoveries last week in the decluttering video that you can watch on YouTube, which is all about books to read to help you declutter your brain. So I needed to forgive the authorities in charge of that dump. And so I'm going to read you another cure, which is actually also from Susan and my independent column, because we wrote the novel Cure and we then, after that was published, carried on writing cures in the independent newspaper. And I'm just going to read you our cure, which is for inability to forgive. And the cure is The Absolutely True Story of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie, which I've got on my shelf back there. If sorry is the hardest word, it's all right is surely the second. Yet this seemingly small shift in attitude has such a powerful effect on those involved, releasing the wrongdoer from shame and conferring on the wronged dignity and grace. You'd think we'd be tripping over ourselves, looking for chances to make it. If you're the sort that generally chooses resentment over forgiveness, or a victim mentality over a shrug of the shoulders, humble yourself with Sherman Alexie's irreverent, cartoon strewn, largely autobiographical tale of a boy with much to forgive in a broken world. Right from the moment he's born, Junior, a Native American, has pretty much everything going against him. Treated as a punch bag by kids and adults alike, he has a too large, too round head, earning him the nickname Globe, brain seizures, and 10 teeth more than he should have. He's also awfully skinny, has a squint, lives on a res, and is the only one of his peers who can imagine a future beyond it. His father is generally drunk. So when Junior decides he's going to join the white kids' school 20 miles up the road, he seems only to be inviting a slew of new grievances. Yet, he has a secret weapon which ultimately saves his sanity and possibly his life, his ability to forgive. He forgives his father for drinking the funds set aside for Christmas presents. He forgives his new classmates for their taunts. He forgives his wild best friend Rowdy for abandoning him. The ultimate act of forgiveness, of course, is that offered to the nation for keeping the Native Americans on no hope reservations, fobbed off with out of date textbooks and half the painkillers white people get because apparently they feel less pain. It's his wise old grandmother who shows him the way with her magnanimous attitude. Listen up, and she'll show you too. So that is the absolutely true story of a part-time Indian by Sherman Alexie. Hey, Tracy's here. Great to see you, Tracy. I haven't seen you for ages on these sessions. Lovely to have you back. And I bet you know that book by Sherman Alexie. Have you read it? Let me know. I'm sure you have. So I'm also just going to have a quick look if I can see it on my shelf. If it doesn't come to hand, then I will come straight back. Is it going to appear to me? Sherman Alexie, where are you? I can't see it. I'll have to show you another time. I'll put it onto, hello, I'll put it onto a page so you can see it. But it's a really great, lovely book. It is a young adult book in theory, but it's one of those books, like all brilliant kids and adult books, that everyone should read. So that's a brilliant book to help you to forgive, and helping to forgive will mean that you will not experience road rage in such a strong way. So that's my thoughts for the evening on road rage and other matters. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. Sassy Fanny, great to see you. Dear Diaroduna Balerin, great to see you too. Sorry about getting the names wrong. That's the joy of Instagram. And Emo Tawi, lovely to see you too. Do send comments. Let me know of any thoughts you have about other books you want to share with me. I'd love to know your thoughts. You can send me comments on Instagram. You can DM me. You can send me comments on Facebook as well. You can also email me, ella@ellabear2.com, and you can send me tweets at ellabear2. You can also, if you'd like, book a bibliotherapy session with me, one-to-one, which takes between 45 minutes and to an hour, in which I talk to you all about what's going on in your life, what you love to read, what you hate to read, what you read, when, where, who with, different ways of reading, and I help you to think about getting more out of your reading. And I give you a prescription of particular books to read. So do think about that. I'm also doing events, workshops for companies, which I can do in London, south of England, around the world. There was someone here from Abu Dhabi tonight who I believe I met at a workshop in Abu Dhabi not that long ago. So think about getting me to your workplace where I can inspire people to get more out of their reading and to transform the way that they see their own life through reading and to escape their screens. So consider that. And on that merry note, come back next week and join me for another fabulous session all about the joy of books. And if you want to suggest any topics to me as well, I'm always willing to listen to suggestions because I do these weekly events. I'm doing one, I do them monthly on Damien Barr's Literary Salon Facebook and Instagram pages. And the next one for him, I think, is about the 24th of October. It's a Wednesday, and it's going to be all about great odysseys in literature. So, next week, what will I do? Maybe I will choose another emotion from my chart of colour, emotion expressed through colour, and I might do another one of them. Lovely to see you all, and I will see you next week. Thanks for coming. Good night.